This video has been made possible by the History Guild. I'd like to thank them for their support and sticking with me during the process of writing and producing this video that documents the 6 Australian VC recipients of the Mediterranean and the North African campaigns during the Second World War. For more on the Australian contribution in the Med, please visit the History Guild website after this video. Sir Arthur Roden Cutler was born in Manly, New South Wales on the 24th of May 1916. During his high school days, he joined the Sydney University Regiment, part of the Australian Army Reserve, in 1936. By May of 1940, he had volunteered for overseas service and received a commission into the 2nd 5th Field Regiment, Royal Australian Artillery of the 7th Australian Division. In early June 1941, Cutler's regiment were part of the Syrian-Lebanon invasion, where a combined Commonwealth force invaded the Vichy French-held territory. The 2nd 5th RAA landed at Hafia on the 7th of June, and after some time held in reserve, the regiment were brought up to give relief to the troops from the 7th Australian Division, who were holding the town of Medellin. During this battle, Cutler would see his first major action of the war, and start in motion the actions that would lead to him winning his Victoria Cross. The 2nd 5th RAA War Diary details the movements of the artillery in the days leading up to the battle. 15th June 1941. A first light, the battalion moved on and arrived at a reserve area, about 9:30 hours. The battalion remained in position here for the remainder of the day, without firing a shot. At 19:30 hours, orders were given to bring the battalion up to a position near Jazeen, and RHQ to luxurious quarters in a hotel. On the morning of the 19th, the Australian artillery opened fire in a diversionary attack on Medellin Fort, supporting a thrust into the town from the left flank by the 2nd 25th Battalion. The Australian attack went according to plan in its early phases, but French tanks, armoured car and infantry were brought up in defence of the town. In the heat of battle, enemy fire had cut the artillery observer's phone line, and Lieutenant Cutler, Captain Clark and Gunners Grayson and Buckingham were stationed at the observation post, and Cutler had gone out under fire to repair the line. 2 French tanks, supported by infantry, were attacking Cutler's observation post. He was quick to return fire and started firing at the oncoming armour with the boy's anti-tank rifle, which at the time was capable of penetrating up to 23mm of armour with a .55 anti-tank cartridge. Talking to Thames Television for the 1985 documentary For Valour, Gunner Jeff Grayson detailed engaging the French tanks. In the first instance, we did nothing about the tank, but as it became obvious it was going to do something about us, Cutler opened up with the boy's anti-tank rifle. At that stage, I'd say at a distance of about 150 yards. Soon after the first shots of the engagement were fired, a shell from one of the tanks fatally wounded Captain Clark and killed Lance Corporal Pratt instantly. Cutler kept on engaging the oncoming vehicles, scoring hits on their tracks. With this, the French started to withdraw from his position. Thinking the enemy were unsure of themselves, he describes the action further in his after-action report, written in the 2nd 5th Field Regiment's War Diary. The boy's rifle must have troubled them to some extent. The infantry were in favour of a withdrawal. Major Dunbar, Captain Marsden and I pressed for an advance. Cutler was instrumental during the rest of the battle, setting up new observation posts in the town, which were able to rain artillery fire into Medellin. Later in the battle, he would be cut off from the rest of the Australian force after calling in more vital artillery support. A French counterattack forced the lieutenant to seek shelter, but he would soon escape under the cover of darkness to friendly lines. He eventually made it back to his own lines on the 20th of June, 1941. However, Medellin was not the only action that would contribute to Cutler's Victoria Cross recommendation. On the 6th of June at Damour on the Syrian coast, the 2nd 5th Field Regiment was supporting an infantry attack into the coastal town. Cutler, yet again, was serving in an artillery observation post. During the advance into Damour, he was involved in a skirmish with French infantry. During this battle he would capture 8 Frenchmen and 3 machine gun posts, one of which he was able to talk them into surrender in his own admittance, bad French. After this remarkable piece of soldiering, Cutler was hit by a hidden MG position on his way back to join his comrades. He would lay wounded for some time before he was found by Australian troops and was brought back to friendly lines. Having tied his revolver lanyard around his right leg to stop the bleeding, Cutler was estimated to have been lying wounded for more than 24 hours, the result of which he would lose his leg. For his outstanding leadership shown throughout the battles of Medellin and his actions at Damour, Lieutenant Roden Cutler was awarded the Victoria Cross on the 28th of November 1941. The opening statement from his medal citation in the London Gazette sums up the regard held for Cutler among his fellow soldiers. For the most conspicuous and sustained gallantry during the Syrian campaign, and for outstanding bravery during the bitter fighting at Medellin, when this artillery officer became a byword amongst the forward troops for whom he worked. Cutler was the only Australian artillery officer to be awarded the VC during the Second World War. After the war, he would have a highly successful career as an Australian diplomat, going on to serve as the Australian Minister for Egypt during the Suez Crisis, and later as Governor of New South Wales for 15 years, from 1966 to 1981, among many other roles, and was knighted by the Queen in 1965 in honour of his diplomatic services to Australia. He would pass away at the age of 85 on the 21st of February 2002, and was awarded a state funeral on the 28th of February 2002. James Hannah Gordon, better known as Jim Gordon, was born in Rockingham in Western Australia in 1909. After his school years, Jim undertook many various jobs, including farming, and was working on goldfields when war broke out in 1939. On the 26th of April 1940, Jim enlisted into the Australian Imperial Force. Lying about his true age of 31, he also gave his middle name as Heather, even though at the time of his enlistment the maximum age that the Australian Imperial Force would recruit was 35. This would later be changed as the war went on to the age of 40 in June 1940. Jim joined the 2nd 31st Infantry Battalion, who at the time were already stationed in the Middle East, having been sent to Egypt then later Palestine to train. After a period of being stationed in the Egyptian port of Meza Maroth, the 2nd 31st was part of the invasion of Syria in June 1941, which was to be the battalion's first offensive operation of the war. After landing in Syria, the battalion were into the thick of the fighting, taking Kibby between the 8th and 11th of June. After these early engagements, the battalion moved on to Jazin. In early July, Gordon, who was in D Company, was sent to take the high ground of the villages of Damour and Alamein to the north of Jazin. On the night of the 9th to the 10th of July, D Company would attack Vichy French positions on Green Hill near Jazin. The troops of D Company came under heavy machine gun fire and their advance stalled. The 2nd 31st War Diary describes the situation that Gordon's company found themselves in that night. 0240 hours. Runner slightly wounded, reporting in from D Company. Company attack only partially successful. All officers casualties, 1 killed. Reached slopes, Green Hill. Position unsound but not finished. Tanks and carriers cannot advance. My research suggests that Gordon's Victoria Cross action took place between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m. in the morning. His official VC recommendation, written by Lieutenant L.T. Hurrell on the 23rd of July 1941, describes his exploits in detail. The enemy position was fortified and completely covered in the area on which Private Gordon and the remainder of the 2 platoons were located. Private Gordon, noting the situation and on his own initiative, crept forward under fire, including grenades, and succeeded in approaching close to the post. He then charged it from the front and with bayonet killed 4 enemy machine gunners. His action completely demoralised the enemy in the area and was a magnificent inspiration to his comrades. For this selfless piece of bravery, Gordon was presented his VC by Lord Gowrie on October 2nd, 1942. After his heroics on Green Hill, Gordon, now a corporal, returned to the 2nd 31st, who were now fighting the Japanese in New Guinea. In 1943 he attained the rank of sergeant and served until being discharged in February of 1941. However, he would re-enlist in December of 1947, staying in the armed forces until his retirement in 1968. In a special Order of the Day message written by Major General Commanding Arthur Allen, He commended the men of Gordon's battalion for their efforts around Jezine. I know that the task was a most arduous one, and that all ranks, the infantry in particular, were called upon to display the utmost courage, determination and physical endurance. I would like to thank every individual who took part, to know that I personally appreciate this grand effort and thank him for it. The next 4 Victoria Cross recipients were awarded their medals for actions in Libya and Egypt in 1941, fighting Owen Rommel's Afrika Korps and Italian forces during the Siege of Tobruk and the Battle of El Alamein in 1942. John Hurst Edmondson, better known as Jack, was born in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, in October 1914. He served with the 4th Militia Battalion from March 1939, before joining the 2nd 17th Infantry Battalion on the 20th of May 1940. After being assigned to the Australian 9th Division, Edmondson and the rest of the 2nd 17th Battalion headed to the Middle East in November 1940 for desert training in Palestine. In March of 1941, they were sent to relieve the 6th Division, who were being deployed to Greece. After reaching Mezze Brega near Tripoli, they soon found themselves as part of the retreat from Benghazi, as Rommel's Afrika Korps routed the Allied forces in the region. By early April of 1941, Edmondson and the rest of the 2nd 17th were in defensive positions, as the Libyan port of Tobruk was besieged by the Afrika Korps and their Italian allies.
So the Australians manned the broken strongpoints, patrolled the rusty wire, and waited, not without misgiving, for the inevitable attack. As the long siege wore on, the old Italian perimeter was greatly strengthened and became known as the Red Line. 2 miles behind it, the garrison constructed the Blue Line, a second defence system.
A garrison of Australians, along with Indian, Polish and Czech troops, fought hard to keep the port under Allied control. It was here that the Australian garrison would earn the nickname the Rats of Tobruk, and where Corporal John Edmondson would be posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. On the night of the 13th of April, Corporal Edmondson and a small party of troops were defending a trench near position 33. The battalion's war diary states that at 11 p.m. the position was attacked by 30 enemy infantry, along with field guns and mortars in support. At 11:45 p.m, Lieutenant Mackle and Corporal Edmondson, along with 6 other men, went out to meet the enemy. Private S.E. Smith, who was part of the counterattack led by Mackle, spoke to the war correspondent Chester Wilmot. His recollection of the counterattack were broadcast by the ABC on the 9th of September 1941. We moved at the double and swung around behind the outpost in a 3-quarter circle to take the Germans from the flank. As we ran forward, we threw our grenades, and when they burst, German fire stopped. Before they could open up again, we were into them with the bayonet. As the Australians rushed to the German machine guns, Edmondson was shot through the neck and stomach. However, these life-threatening injuries did not stop John from taking part in the counterattack. He kept going and charged at the Germans with bayonet fixed. There was bitter hand-to-hand fighting as the group encountered the enemy face to face. During the melee, Lieutenant Mackle was set upon by enemy troops, and Edmondson bravely came to his commanding officer's aid. His medal citation describes John's final actions that night. His officer had his bayonet in one of the enemy and was grasped around the legs by him when another attacked him from behind. He called for help, and Corporal Edmondson, who was some yards away, immediately came to his assistance, and in spite of his wounds, killed both of the enemy. This action undoubtedly saved his officer's life. Shortly after returning from this successful counterattack, Corporal Edmondson died of his wounds. His actions throughout the operations were outstanding for resolution, leadership, and conspicuous bravery. His Victoria Cross would be awarded to John's mother and father on the 27th of September 1941, and they are now held by the Australian War Memorial. Born in Daydawn, Western Australia in September 1908, Arthur Gurney joined the AIF in December of 1940. In July of 1941, he embarked for the Middle East with the AIF and joined the 2nd 48th Infantry Battalion, part of the 9th Division, in September of the same year. After fighting at Tobruk, the battalion was sent to Egypt to bolster the forces on the Alamein line. It was here, during the first battle for El Alamein in July 1942, that Gurney would be posthumously awarded his Victoria Cross. On the 22nd of July at 5:30 am in the morning, B&D companies of the 2nd 48th waited at their start line close to the railway station at Tel El Isa, a position that had been fought hard for by Australian troops in the days leading up to the attack. Gurney was in D Company 17 Platoon, who were to attack a ridge line close to the station. The after-action report in the 2nd 48th War Diary describes the start of their assault. Soon after 0600, the two companies began their advance 600 yards out. They came under heavy shell fire from the front and left flanks. Though suffering severe casualties and being out of communication with Battalion HQ, they continued their advance. Gurney's platoon pushed on in the face of the enemy resistance, and their CO, Lieutenant William Smith, was fatally wounded during the battle, was said to have told Gurney to drop his boy's anti-tank rifle he was carrying in favour of a lighter Lee Enfield rifle. Pinned down by enemy fire, Gurney, under his own initiative, rose to his feet and rushed forward towards a German machine gun post, pinning his comrades down. With his bayonet fixed, he dispatched the 3 men manning it. He then ran to another German position and killed 2 other men, taking a 3rd prisoner. However, after this selfless act under fire, Gurney's luck would run out. The London Gazette documented his medal-winning citation on the 8th of September 1942. At this stage, a stick grenade was thrown at Private Gurney, which knocked him to the ground. He rose again, picked up his rifle and charged a 3rd post by using the bayonet with great vigour. He then disappeared from view, and later his body was found in an enemy post. By this single-handed act of gallantry in the face of a determined enemy, Private Gurney established his company to press forward to its objective, inflicting heavy losses upon the enemy. The successful outcome of this engagement was almost entirely due to Private Gurney's heroism at the moment when it was needed. The battle for the ridge at Tel El Isa was a costly one, with many casualties taken by the Australians. However, the attack was deemed a success. The battalion's after-action report states, "It was discovered later that they inflicted serious casualties on the Germans, so serious that their objective Western PT-24 was that night abandoned and never subsequently occupied by the enemy. Thus, although our 2 forward companies were forced to withdraw, the objective of the battalion attack was achieved, and this particular enemy position finally neutralised." Gurney is now buried at the El Alamein Cemetery in Egypt, and his VC, along with his other service medals, are held by the AWM. Born in Katanning on the 19th of October 1902, Percival Eric Gratwick, known as Percy, eventually joined the 2nd AEF in December of 1940, after initially being rejected for a broken nose. He eventually joined the 2nd 48th Infantry Battalion in July of 1941, and took part in the defence of Tobruk, the same battalion that Stanley Gurney had fought with at Tel El Isa during the First Battle of El Alamein. In October 1942, the stage was set for a second Battle of El Alamein, with the combined British and Commonwealth forces attempting to deal a knockout blow to Rommel's Afrika Korps. In the early phase of the battle, the Australian 9th Division were at the right flank of the Allied line, near the Egyptian coastline. Gratwick was in 7 Platoon of A Company, which were tasked with attacking a position known as Trig 29. The objectives for the attack, from a preliminary operations report written in November 1942, states: 2 forward companies to advance on an 80 by 90 front and halt. 1 company mounted on carriers with 1 6-pounder and 4 37mm anti-tank guns in tow, to move under cover of the artillery concentration up the track, debus and assault the objective. A platoon went into the attack on the night of the 25th, 26th of October. All companies involved in the operation faced severe enemy resistance, and by daybreak of the 26th, Percy's platoon had been reduced to 7 men after a night's heavy fighting. The battalion war diary describes the moments leading up to Gratwick's medal-winning exploits. Lieutenant Taggart and 4 others were killed when assaulting a series of enemy positions, which was preventing the company from obtaining its final objectives. Private Percy Gratwick, with Corporal Lindsay, assaulted the posts. Gratwick charged a mortar post and destroyed it with grenades. He then went on to 2 successive posts, using his bayonet with deadly effect. Gratwick's medal recommendation recollects the final moments of Gratwick's courageous efforts that morning. He inflicted further casualties and was within striking distance of his objective when he was killed by a burst of machine gun fire. His unselfish courage and determined effort against the heaviest opposition changed a doubtful situation into a successful capture of his company's final objective. 2nd 48th Australian Infantry Battalion owes much to his initiative and fearless devotion to duty. Gratwick is buried alongside his comrades in the Alamein cemetery, and his medals are displayed at the Army Museum of Western Australia. The last Victoria Cross recipient of this video is William Henry Kibby, who also fought in the deserts of North Africa with the 2nd 48th Infantry Battalion. Originally born in County Durham, England, aged 11, Kibby's family emigrated to Adelaide in 1914. He had been part of the Australian militia that later became the Australian Army Reserve pre-war, and on the 29th of June 1940 he volunteered for the 2nd AIF before embarking for overseas service. Kibby, who was promoted to sergeant while training in Palestine, broke his leg, falling into a slit trench. While recuperating, he produced a series of watercolours and drawings, even forming a friendship with Australian painter and actor Esmond George, who brought home some of his works to Kibby's wife Mabel after his time at the front. After recovering from his accident, Kibby rejoined the battalion before they moved to Egypt. He saw action with the battalion during the Battle for Tel El-Isa around the same time as his fellow Victoria Cross winner Stanley Gurney. Much like Roden Cutler, Kibby was awarded his Victoria Cross for his conduct over several days of combat rather than for just one single piece of heroics. All of these acts were carried out by Kibby during the second battle for El Alamein in October of 1942. The first of which was on the 23rd of October 1942, attacking Mitiara Ridge. Kibby was in 70 Platoon of D Company. During the fighting, the platoon's commanding officer was killed and he took command. The battalion's war diary describes Kibby's initiative in the heat of battle. He was immediately ordered by Captain Robbins to clear up an enemy post holding up the company. Kibby's platoon was slightly disorganised at the time, and he, leaving no order for his platoon to follow him, dashed into the enemy's post with his Tommy gun blazing, killing several enemy and capturing 4 more. By the time his platoon reached him, the enemy post was cleared and the company advance continued. Kibby's VC recommendation, written by Lieutenant Colonel Hammer, details his leadership and bravery in the defence of Trig 29, the day after Percy Gratwick posthumously won his VC, attacking the same position. Intense enemy artillery concentrations were directed on the battalion area, invariably followed with counterattacks by tanks and infantry. Throughout both the attack that culminated in the capture of Trig 29 and the reorganisation period that followed, Sergeant Kibby moved from section to section, personally directing their fire, cheering the men and maintaining their morale, despite the fact that the platoon throughout was suffering heavy casualties. His whole demeanour during this difficult phase in the operation was an inspiration to his platoon and gave them great heart to retain at all costs the grounds which they had gained. After the defence of Trig 29 by the 2nd 48th, Kibby was yet again thrust into the fight on the evening of the 30th to 31st of October, attacking Ring Contour 25. However, even before this battle, Kibby was already being recommended for a medal for his command in the days previous. Captain Robbins, who was in command of a platoon in D Company, told a Lieutenant Trellar, "If I am killed, please recommend Sergeant Kibby for the DCM for consistent gallantry and leadership during the nights of the 23rd, 24th October and the 25th, 26th October." Unfortunately, Captain Robbins would not survive the subsequent attack to learn of Kibby's VC winning deeds. Lieutenant Colonel Hammer spoke of the fighting at Ring Contour 25 in his notes for a lecture he gave on the Battle of El Alamein during a tour of Iraq and Iran in January 1943. "We were involved with the enemy shortly after leaving the start line at Trig 29 area. Flares and bursts of medium machine gun fire from both sides. We got away after several casualties had been received, and away to the heaviest fight. What a fight it was. The War Diary also mentions Kibby in the entry for the 30th and 31st of October 1942. Sergeant Kibby, D Company, again distinguished himself in the assault on the final objective. The whole company was sprayed by withering fire, killing and wounding many. But Kibby, gallant man as he was, continued to advance, crawling forward, throwing grenades and firing his Tommy gun until he was killed in the enemy post. He is being recommended for the Victoria Cross. Kibby's wife Mabel was presented his posthumous Victoria Cross by Governor-General of Australia Baron Gowrie on the 27th of November 1943. Although the final attack that Kibby was involved in during the Second Battle of Alamein was unsuccessful, the battle as a whole was not. It was a major victory for the Allies and played a large part in the overall Allied success in the region, with the men of the Australian divisions who fought with fearlessness and panache wherever they saw battle being eternally linked with the fight for the desert plains of North Africa, whether they were awarded medals or not during the Second World War. In his 1950 book, The Hinge of Fate, Winston Churchill wrote, "It may almost be said, before Alamein we never had a victory. After Alamein we never had a defeat." This History Guild project, commemorating the service by Victorians in the Mediterranean theatre of World War II, was sponsored by the Victorian Government and the Victorian Veterans Council. Find out more at historyguild.org. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share. And stay tuned for more military history.